Once upon a time in the village of Yumas, a place where traditions ran deep, lived a young woman named Chinwe. She was a tailor, and at 25, she already had the poise of someone much older, because of the weight of her family's burdens. She was the first child of Eze and Nneka. Nneka had been Eze's first wife, a union arranged by their parents. She was a woman of quiet strength, her beauty only matched by her kindness. After their traditional marriage ceremony, they awaited the arrival of their children for some years, because they could bore a child. After the wait they bore a daughter named Chinwe. Their joy was boundless, for a child was seen as a blessing from the gods. But as the years passed and Nneka bore no more children, a shadow fell over their happiness. Eze, a man deeply rooted in the village's traditions, found himself under pressure from his family and the village elders. In their eyes, a man's legacy was secured through his offspring, and the more children he had, the greater his status. With Nneka's inability to bear more children, Eze thought of getting another wife. After much contemplation and under the urging of his kinsman, Eze decided to take a second wife. Eze met and married Neca, a young woman from a neighboring village. Neca was strikingly beautiful, with skin the color of roasted coffee and eyes that sparkled like the stars on a clear night. The day Neca arrived at Eze's compound, the villagers had gathered, eager to catch a glimpse of the new wife. They stood in small clusters, murmuring amongst themselves, their faces a mix of curiosity and judgment. In Yumas, the arrival of a second wife was both a spectacle and a subject of gossip, an event that would be discussed for months to come. Neca stepped into the compound gracefully, drawing the eyes of everyone present. Her eyes, sharp and bright, surveyed the crowd with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. She moved with an elegance that seemed out of place in the dusty village, her every step a declaration of her new status. Eze stood beside her, a proud smile on his face. Nneka watched from the veranda, her heart a storm of emotions. She had known this day would come, yet the reality of it hit her like a cold wind, and had prepared herself for this moment, for the day her husband would bring another woman into their home. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but she had no choice. In their culture, a man's legacy was tied to his children, and with her barrenness, she could not fulfill that role. As the young women of the village chattered about Neca's beauty and sophistication, they couldn't help but draw comparisons. Inside the house, Neca was introduced to the family. Eze's relatives welcomed her warmly, their smiles wide and accommodating. Neca's demeanor was polite but detached. She knew her position and intended to assert it. She greeted everyone with a nod, her eyes lingering on Nneka for a moment longer than necessary. In that brief exchange, a silent understanding passed between them. Neca was here to stay, and Nneka's place in the household had shifted. Days turned into weeks, and Neca quickly settled into her new role. She took charge of the household with a deft hand, organizing the servants, and overseeing the meals, and making decisions that had once been Nneka's domain. Eze, entranced by his new wife's energy and charm, deferred to her in all things. He spent more time with Neca, often found laughing and talking with her in a way he hadn't with Nneka in years. Neca's presence brought a new vibrancy to the household, but it also cast a long shadow. While Nneka moved quietly, tending to household duties, Neca was the center of attention. She reveled in the adulation, enjoying the perks of being the favored wife. Ise's relatives, always eager to stay in his good graces, lavished her with gifts and compliments, further cementing her place in the family. Despite the initial awkwardness, Nneka tried to maintain a cordial relationship with Neca. She offered help and advice, hoping to find common ground. But Neca, ever wary, kept her distance. She was polite but distant, accepting Nneka's overtures with a cold smile. The two women lived under the same roof, but their worlds were miles apart. Nneka was the embodiment of tradition and endurance, while Neca was the new dawn, full of promise and change. As Neca's pregnancy progressed, her influence over Ise grew. She whispered in his ear, subtly steering his decisions and sowing seeds of doubt about Nneka and her children. She questioned the need for Ise to support Nneka's family, hinting that they should fend for themselves. Ise, eager to please his new wife, began to distance himself from Nneka's children, providing less financial support and attention. Neca's pregnancy brought mixed emotions to the household. While Ise and his relatives celebrated the impending arrival of a new heir, Nneka and her daughter was reminded of their precarious position. The joy in the compound was palpable, but it only served to deepen the chasm between the two families. Neca basked in the attention, using her pregnancy as a tool to further solidify her standing in the family. One evening, as the compound was bathed in the soft glow of dusk, Neca went into labor. The household erupted into a flurry of activity, with servants rushing to fetch the midwife and prepare for the birth. Ise paced nervously, his face a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Nneka offered her assistance, but Neca coldly refused, preferring to have her own attendants by her side. Hours later, the cries of a newborn filled the air. Neca had given birth to a baby boy, and Ise's joy was boundless. He proclaimed the child as the future of his lineage, his heir. The village soon learned of the birth, and the celebrations continued late into the night. Nneka watched from the shadows, her heart heavy with a mixture of emotions. She felt a pang of jealousy but quickly suppressed it, knowing it was futile. This was Neca's moment, and she would not begrudge her that. But the birth also marked a turning point, a realization that her position in the family had irrevocably changed. As Neca cradled her newborn son, a satisfied smile on her lips, she felt a surge of triumph. She had secured her place in Ise's life and the family, and nothing could take that away from her. But little did she know that her actions would set off a chain of events that would unravel the very fabric of the family she sought to control. Neca's son, named Abina, became the apple of Ise's eye. The pride he felt was evident in the way he carried himself, with the satisfaction of having a son to continue his lineage. The joy of Abina's birth reverberated throughout the village, further elevating Neca's status. She basked in the glow of newfound attention and power, her every whim catered to by Ise and his relatives. Nneka and her daughter, however, found themselves increasingly marginalized. Ise's affection for his first family waned visibly, his focus entirely on Neca and her son. He spent lavishly on them, sparing no expense in ensuring they had the best of everything. The contrast was stark and painful. While Neca's son was clothed in fine garments and given the best education, Amaka's daughter were left to make do with the bare minimum. Years passed and Neca became pregnant again, and unknown to her Amaka was equally pregnant. Ys had slept in her room in one of the nights he came back home drunk and had woken from her bed the next morning. They both had their babies. And Amaka continued to have more children just as Neca. Years passed and Ys was still being manipulated by his second wife Neca. He cared for her and her children, leaving Amaka to care for her own children. Chinwe, now in her early 20s, felt the burden of these changes acutely. She had always been the responsible one, taking care of her younger siblings and helping her mother with the household chores. But as Neca's influence grew, Chinwe's responsibilities became heavier. She took on more sewing work, her skilled hands crafting beautiful garments that brought a modest income. The money she earned was a lifeline for her family, but it was never enough to lift them out of their circumstances. Neca, despite her outward charm, harbored a deep resentment towards Amaka's children. To her, they were a constant reminder of her insecurity, a threat to her position and her children's future. She ensured that her own children were given every advantage, while subtly undermining Amaka's children at every turn. She convinced Ys that spending money on Amaka's children was a waste, planting seeds of doubt and distrust in his mind. Ys, eager to please Neca and caught up in his own biases, readily agreed. He justified his actions by telling himself that Amaka's children were old enough to fend for themselves. He dismissed Chinwe's efforts as insignificant, viewing her sewing work as a hobby rather than a means of survival for her family. He ignored the quiet pleas of his other children, focusing instead on building a future for Neca's offspring. The divide in the household was further exacerbated by the treatment of the children. Neca's daughters, Uju and Adora, were sent to the best schools in the nearby town. They wore crisp uniforms and carried new books. Ys doted on them, ensuring they had every opportunity to succeed. In contrast, Amaka's sons, Abuchi and Udaki, were apprenticed to local tradesmen, learning carpentry and bricklaying. They were denied the chance for formal education, their potential stifled by their father's indifference. Uganma, the second daughter of Amaka, suffered the most. Her beauty had once been a source of pride, but now it seemed a curse. She attracted the attention of many young men, but none were willing to marry her. They pursued her for brief relationships, leaving her heartbroken and disgraced. The birth of her child out of wedlock only deepened her shame, and the villagers' whispers followed her everywhere she went. Uganma's plight weighed heavily on Amaka, who sought answers in prayers and consultations with traditional healers, all to no avail. Neca, seeing Uganma's misfortunes, could barely conceal her satisfaction. She had always felt threatened by Uganma's beauty and the attention it garnered. Now, with Uganma's reputation tarnished, Neca saw it as a victory. She continued her subtle manipulations, ensuring that Issa's disdain for Amaka's children grew. She whispered to him about their supposed laziness, their lack of ambition, and their unworthiness of his support. As the days passed, the divide in the household became more apparent. Mealtimes, once a communal affair, were now split. Neca and her children dined with ease, enjoying hearty meals and lively conversation. Amaka and her children ate separately, their meals simple and sparse. The laughter and warmth that once filled the house were replaced by a cold, oppressive silence. Despite the growing rift, Chinwe remained resolute. She worked tirelessly, sewing late into the night to provide for her family. She took pride in her work, and encouraged her siblings to stay strong, reminding them that they were a family and that they had to support one another. Chinwe's strength became a beacon of hope for her siblings, a reminder that they could endure whatever came their way. But beneath Chinwe's composed exterior lay a simmering anger. She resented the way her father had abandoned them, the way he lavished attention and resources on Neca's children while neglecting his own. She felt the sting of injustice every time she saw Neca's daughters in their fine clothes or heard about their academic achievements. Chinwe knew that, given the same opportunities, she and her siblings could have achieved just as much, if not more. Uju and Adora, once friendly with their half-siblings, became aloof, their attitudes mirroring their mother's. They rarely interacted with Chinwe and her siblings, and when they did, it was with a sense of entitlement. The emotional distance between the two sets of children grew, fueled by Neca's machinations. She encouraged her children to excel, constantly reminding them that they were the true heirs of Iza's legacy. She subtly belittled Amaka's children, planting seeds of doubt and insecurity. Her words were like poison, seeping into the minds of her children and reinforcing the divide. Amaka watched this all unfold with a heavy heart. She saw the changes in her children, the way they withdrew into themselves, their spirits dampened by the constant neglect. She worried for their future, knowing that without Iza's support, their prospects were limited. But Amaka was a woman of faith, and she held onto the hope that things would change. She prayed for a miracle, for a way to bridge the chasm that had torn her family apart. As time passed, the divide in Iza's household became an accepted reality. The villagers, once curious and judgmental, grew accustomed to the situation. They spoke in hushed tones about the favoritism, the neglect, and the brewing resentment. Some pitied Amaka and her children, while others saw it as the natural order of things, a consequence of being the children of a barren woman. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, Chinwe and her siblings continued to persevere. They knew they could not change their father's favoritism or Neca's machinations, but they could support one another. And so, they resolved to make the best of their circumstances, determined to find their own paths in a world that seemed set against them. The household was rife with undercurrents of tension, but beneath the surface lay an even darker secret, a hidden spell that had been cast long ago. It was a secret known only to Neca, one she had guarded fiercely, her heart hardened by jealousy and a desperate need to secure her place in the family. This spell was the cause of the misfortune that had plagued Amaka's children, keeping them from finding happiness and success. The village of Yumas was steeped in tradition and superstition. Stories of witchcraft and curses were common, whispered among the elders and passed down through generations. Neca, though outwardly modern, was deeply rooted in these beliefs. When she realized that Amaka's infertility had ended with her own arrival and that Amaka was having more children, she saw a threat to her status and her children's future. In her desperation, Neca had turned to a powerful witch doctor known for his dark magic. She had visited him secretly, under the cover of night, driven by a burning desire to ensure her dominance in Iza's household. The witch doctor had warned her of the consequences but had ultimately agreed to help. He performed a ritual that bound Nneka's children to an evil pot, hidden deep within the forest, effectively cursing them. The curse was simple yet devastating. It would make Nneka's children appear undesirable to potential suitors and cause them to fail in their endeavors. It was a curse that would make them invisible in the eyes of the world, keeping them trapped in a cycle of misfortune and despair. The evil pot, a clay vessel filled with enchanted herbs and symbols, was buried beneath a sacred tree. The witch doctor had warned Neca that the curse could only be broken if someone discovered the pot and performed a specific ritual to destroy its power. Confident in the secrecy of the location and the unlikelihood of anyone discovering it, Neca had agreed to the terms. She left the witch doctor's hut with a mix of relief and guilt, the weight of her actions heavy on her shoulders. Over the years, Neca watched as the curse took effect. Suitors who came to ask for Nneka's daughter's hands in marriage would inexplicably lose interest or face sudden misfortunes. Nneka's sons struggled in their apprenticeships, constantly facing setbacks and failures. The villagers began to whisper about the family's bad luck, speculating about what unseen force was at work. Neca, knowing the truth, reveled in their misfortune, her sense of security growing with each passing year. Beginning.Nneka, the most affected by the curse, found herself trapped in a cycle of unfulfilled relationships. Her beauty, once her greatest asset, became a burden. Men approached her not with serious intentions but with fleeting desires, leaving her heartbroken and humiliated. Her reputation in the village suffered, and she bore the brunt of the villagers' gossip. The birth of her child out of wedlock only compounded her shame, making her an object of pity and scorn. Nneka, distressed by her children's plight, sought help from various sources. She consulted with traditional healers, visited prayer houses, and even sought the counsel of the village priest. Yet, no matter what she did, the curse remained unbroken, its grip tightening around her family. She could not understand why misfortune seemed to follow her children, why their lives were marked by a series of unfortunate events. Her faith was tested, but she continued to pray, hoping for a miracle that would save her family. The turning point came one fateful day when Chinwe, returning from a long day at her sewing shop, encountered an old beggar on the outskirts of the village. The beggar, a frail old man with a long white beard and tattered clothes, sat by the roadside, holding a small calabash in his hands. Chinwe, her heart always open to those in need, stopped to give him some money and a piece of bread she had brought for her own dinner. As she handed the offerings to the beggar, he looked up at her with piercing eyes. His gaze was unsettling, as if he could see into the depths of her soul. He thanked her for her kindness and then, in a voice that was surprisingly strong and clear, began to speak. "You are a kind soul, my daughter," he said. "But there is a curse that has bound you and your siblings, cast by a jealous woman. The pot lies buried beneath the sacred tree, deep in the forest. To break the curse, you must find it and destroy its power." Chinwe was stunned by the beggar's words. She had heard tales of spells and dark magic but had never imagined that her family could be affected by such things. The beggar continued, describing the ritual she needed to perform to break the curse. She had to find the pot, grind bitter cola and pour it inside, and then smash it to pieces. Only then would the curse be lifted, and her family's fortunes could change. Thanking the beggar, Chinwe hurried home, her mind racing with thoughts of what she had just heard. She knew she had to act quickly, for the curse had already done enough damage. That night, she shared the beggar's revelation with her mother and siblings. They were shocked and horrified, struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what Neca had done. But there was also a glimmer of hope, a chance to break free from the chains that had bound them for so long. The following day, Chinwe set out for the forest, accompanied by her brothers, Abuchi and Udaki. They moved stealthily, wary of being seen by anyone who might report back to Neca. The forest was dense and foreboding, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and rotting leaves. As they ventured deeper, Chinwe's heart pounded with a mix of fear and determination. She knew they had to find the pot and destroy it, no matter the cost. After hours of searching, they finally came upon the sacred tree. Its gnarled roots twisted into the earth, and its thick branches cast long shadows in the dim light. With a deep breath, Chinwe knelt beside the tree and began to dig. Her hands worked quickly, scooping out the soil until she uncovered the pot. It was a simple clay vessel, unremarkable except for the aura of malevolence that seemed to emanate from it. Following the beggar's instructions, Chinwe performed the ritual. Then, with a quick, decisive movement, she smashed the pot against the tree. The vessel shattered, its contents spilling onto the ground. As the pieces lay scattered, a cold wind swept through the forest, carrying away the remnants of the curse. The effect was immediate. Chinwe felt a weight lift from her shoulders, a sense of freedom she hadn't known in years. She looked at her brothers, who were grinning with a mix of disbelief and joy. They had done it. They had broken the curse. They quickly gathered the broken pieces and buried them, ensuring that no trace of the dark magic remained. As they made their way back home, the air seemed lighter, the forest less ominous. They knew that they had to keep their actions secret, at least for now. Neca never knew the spell had been broken, or she might attempt to cast another. Chinwe and her siblings returned to their daily lives, waiting to see if the spell's effects would truly dissipate. And dissipate they did. Over the next few weeks, the changes were subtle but unmistakable. Yugenma, once shunned and gossiped about, began to receive sincere interest from potential suitors. Men who had previously ignored her now saw her in a new light, recognizing her beauty and kind heart. The whispers of the villagers softened, and the weight of her past began to lift. For the first time in years, Yugenma felt hope, a future that did not seem bleak and lonely. Abuchi and Udaki, too, experienced a shift in fortune. Their apprenticeships, once fraught with difficulties, began to flourish. Their confidence grew, and with it, their determination to build a better life for themselves. Chinwe continued her work as a seamstress, but now with a renewed sense of purpose. Her business began to thrive, attracting more customers and earning her a reputation for excellence. She took pride in her achievements, knowing that she was not only supporting her family but also breaking free from the curse that had held them back for so long. Neca, oblivious to the changes, continued with her life as usual. She reveled in her status and the attention of her husband, unaware that her carefully constructed web of deceit was unraveling. The breaking of the curse brought about significant changes in the lives of Nneka's children, but it also set off a chain of events that would have far-reaching consequences for the entire family. As the weeks turned into months, the repercussions of the truth began to unravel, exposing hidden resentments, long-buried secrets, and the true nature of those involved. Neca noticed the changes in Nneka's children's lives and suspicion gnawed at her. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, something that threatened the carefully constructed life she had built. She began to watch Nneka's children more closely, her jealousy and paranoia growing with each passing day. She wondered if they had discovered her secret, if they knew about the curse. The fear of exposure consumed her, making her increasingly anxious and irritable. Her suspicions were confirmed one fateful day when she decided to visit the sacred tree where the evil pot had been buried. As she dug through the soil, her heart raced with dread. She unearthed only broken shards, the remnants of the pot she had once relied on. The realization hit her like a blow: someone had destroyed the curse. Neca's world came crashing down. The power she had wielded, the control she had exercised over her ease and the household, was slipping through her fingers. Panic set in as she tried to come up with a plan to regain her hold over the family. She knew she had to act quickly, but her mind was clouded with fear and desperation. Neca sought out the witch doctor who had helped her cast the spell. But the witch doctor, upon seeing the destruction of the pot, warned her that there was nothing more he could do. He cautioned her against trying to manipulate dark forces again, but Neca, driven by her desperation, ignored his warnings. Her attempts to regain control only made things worse. She lashed out at Nneka's children, accusing them of witchcraft and attempting to tarnish their reputations. But the villagers, who had begun to see the positive changes in Nneka's children, were skeptical of Neca's claims. They whispered among themselves, questioning her motives and wondering if she had something to hide. The once unshakable support she had enjoyed from the community began to waver. Ease, too, noticed the changes in his household. He saw the growing success of Nneka's children and the increasing tension between them and Neca. Confused and torn, he struggled to understand what was happening. Neca's erratic behavior and baseless accusations troubled him. Neca fell ill. Her condition worsened rapidly, and she was eventually confined to her hut. The illness, initially believed to be a stroke, left her physically debilitated and unable to speak clearly. But in her weakened state, Neca began to mumble incoherently about the curse and the role she had played in casting it. Her confessions, though fragmented and disjointed, were damning. She spoke of the evil pot, the witch doctor, and her jealousy of Nneka and her children. Neca's children, desperate to protect their mother and their own reputations, tried to keep her confessions a secret. They urged her to remain silent, to stop talking about the spell. But Neca, now a prisoner of her own guilt and fear, continued to ramble, her words spilling out in fits and starts. Her confessions were overheard by the household staff and, eventually, by the villagers who came to visit her. The truth spread like wildfire. The villagers were shocked and horrified by Neca's actions. The revelations of her jealousy and manipulation shattered the carefully maintained facade of respectability she had built. The community's perception of her changed overnight. She went from being a respected matron to a pariah, a woman who had used dark magic to harm innocent children. The villagers' pity for her quickly turned to disdain, and they distanced themselves from her and her family. For Nneka and her children, the revelations were both a relief and a source of deep pain. They finally understood the source of their misfortunes and the struggles they had faced. The knowledge that they had been cursed by someone they had trusted was a bitter pill to swallow. But the truth also brought a sense of liberation. The curse was broken, and they were free to live their lives without the shadow of Neca's jealousy hanging over them. Ease was devastated by the truth. The realization that his wife, whom he had loved and trusted, had betrayed him and his children shook him to his core. He felt an overwhelming sense of guilt for neglecting Nneka and their children, for allowing Neca to manipulate him and poison his mind. She had suffered greatly under Ease's favoritism and Neca's machinations, and she was determined to protect her children from further harm. Neca, confined to her wheelchair and ostracized by the community, lived out her days in relative isolation. Her children, once favored and privileged, faced the stigma of their mother's actions. They struggled to rebuild their lives, grappling with the consequences of their mother's jealousy and the loss of the respect they had once enjoyed. Nneka's children, free from the curse, began to flourish. Uganma found a good man who accepted her and her child, and they married in a joyful ceremony that brought the village together. Abuchi and Udaki, now skilled tradesmen, established successful businesses and became respected members of the community. Chinwe, whose sewing business had grown considerably, became a well-known and admired figure in the village. Ease, burdened by guilt and regret, spent his remaining years trying to make amends. He provided financial support for Nneka and their children, acknowledging his past mistakes and seeking their forgiveness. Though their relationship remained strained, there was a sense of closure and understanding. Ease knew he could never undo the harm that had been done, but he was determined to do what he could to make things right. The villagers, once eager to gossip about the family's misfortunes, now offered support and kindness, recognizing the strength and resilience of Nneka's children. The family, though scarred by the events, emerged stronger and more united. They had faced adversity and overcome it, finding strength in each other and in the truth. The divide that had once torn them apart was healed, and they moved forward with a newfound sense of hope and determination.